Let's talk about the game, the greatest rivalry in sports history. What you have to love about Michigan versus Ohio State is it sucks all the oxygen out of the room. There is so much. I mean, this rivalry is jam-packed with history, talent, tradition, hatred, quality of play, passion, intensity, respect, and also disrespect. That you sometimes forget that all the other games on rivalry weekend, the final week of the regular season, exist. This is especially true if you're in the Big Ten or a fan of Michigan or Ohio State. This is the one game that matters to many Michigan and many Ohio State fans. And especially for Ohio State head coach Ryan Day, this is the game that matters. The question has now been asked for 3 preseasons in a row. Can Ryan Day get the job done? And Michigan is being treated by many as more important than a national championship, even though Ohio State's the most publicly bet team to win it all. And for Michigan, how they got to winning the national championship last year was making Ohio State their Super Bowl. So there's so much to love about this rivalry, and I want to dedicate my time talking about it because I'm going to have a blast doing it. Now, you can tell from the cover art, from the title even, that I'm picking Ohio State to win this game. And full disclosure, I'm a Michigan fan, but I pride myself on being as objective as I possibly can. I think these two teams this year are going to be near elite at the worst and elite at the best. Maybe Ohio State can be all-time good, as Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel have alluded to. I've expressed before that I sort of doubt that with this team. I have questions about aspects of their roster to where I'm not comfortable putting them or even putting their ceiling in that all-time great conversation. For Ohio State's defense, certainly. Michigan had an all-time great defense last year. Maybe they can repeat that this season. You see that I think these rosters are much stronger on the defensive side of the ball. I think the defensive lines, the linebacker cores, the corners, and the safeties of these schools will be among the best in the country. The running backs, especially at Ohio State, where they have the best depth and best quality and best balanced, not just between the starting two, but all the backs in their room, including incoming freshman James Peoples. I love their running back room, and I love Donovan Edwards. And I think that both teams will enter the game with double-digit wins, whether that's 10-1 or 11-0. I think Michigan will enter undefeated. I think Ohio State's dropping a road game to Oregon early in the season. They could drop it to Penn State instead. They very unlikely could drop to both, although, again, very unlikely. Doubt that happens. They could also enter 11-0. Michigan could drop easily their home game against Oregon. And while I favor Michigan by quite a bit in terms of odds against Texas, that could also be a loss. I mean, Michigan does lose a ton, and I think both of these teams will be ranked inside the top 4, top 5, definitely top 10. A little bit of history, in fact, why not, for this matchup. Michigan, since 2000, is 4-2 when the game is a top 5 matchup. But when you look a little deeper than that, the home team is 5-1 since 2000 under the same parameters. The only time in a top 5 matchup that the home team has lost, this includes 2003, 2006, and the previous 3 seasons, and also 2016 in that dramatic overtime win for the Buckeyes. The only team that took an L at home in a top 5 edition of the game is Ohio State in 2022. And these teams, especially in the case of Ohio State, are built differently. For Ohio State, very differently compared to even just 2 years ago. That's not just what the portal does. That's what adapting to adversity and responding to disappointment does. Or just responding to change. Not even when you've had a bad season. Michigan exceeded expectations in 2022, beat Ohio State, but they lost to TCU, and they knew that they had to bring back much of their roster and bring in some other transfers. to try and reach the national championship game and win it, and they did. And for Ohio State to beat Michigan, to help secure an easier path to the playoff, a more likely path to the playoff, they brought in Jim Knowles, and he has reworked their defense. And Ryan Day brought in Chip Kelly to rework the offense and help him to evolve in his CEO role and make Ohio State better. So this matchup is very fascinating. I think that these teams, just roster-wise, in terms of their strong points and weak links, are the closest that they've been between a Jim Harbaugh team and a Ryan Day team. And I'm serious when I say that. I mean, the question marks for these teams are quarterback and offensive line in a certain sense. For Michigan, I'm confident in their O-line. Wide receiver, I think, is an area with deeper questions for Michigan, and Ohio State's loaded there. But that's about it. Same with special teams, which goes to Michigan. Defensively, these two teams are similar in the sense that they're elite. They both have great depth in the defensive back room and the defensive line. Their linebackers have some returning production questions, but they have a lot of talent there. And their backs, I mean, Travion Henderson, Quinshad Judkins, Donovan Edwards could be the top three backs in all of college football. That's just a little bit of a matchup preview along with some fun history. By the way, Michigan has never won 2 games in a row in Columbus when it's a top 5 matchup. If Michigan were to do that this year under my predictions, because I think it'll be a top 5 matchup, or at least Ohio State will be a top 5 team, then Michigan would make history. Remember to like this video as it helps support College Football with Sam by getting us into the algorithm, earning more viewers, consequentially more subscriptions, more college football fanatics in this community like yourself, and also helps us to earn more money so that we can invest it into this channel and produce more content for you. Also, please subscribe to the channel yourself if you haven't already, or if you haven't already, click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release more college football content, whether it relates to the game, Michigan, Ohio State, or the rest of the Big Ten. You are not going to want to miss what we have to produce here on College Football with Sam. And also comment your prediction for this year's edition of the game down in the comment section below. Thank you. Before I talk about why I think Ohio State will win this game, though, I want to talk about why Michigan can win, because I think it would only do justice to talk about all possibilities. I'm going to give 5 reasons for each team. Reason number 1 for Michigan is their elite defensive front. And the fact that you could even say it's an NFL defensive front. I think Michigan has the best defensive line in the country. They have 5 players, including 3 defensive tackles, who could be All-Americans. I said could. Not all 5 of them will be All-Americans. I'm just saying they have a chance. And Graham and Grant, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, they're projected to be first-round players. Bring back several sacks, tackles for loss. Both are over 300 pounds, got good height, wingspan, great at pass rush. Kenneth Grant tracking down Katron Allen last year. They have speed. The defensive tackle room is the best in the country, and the defensive ends, with Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, they're going to be great. And half of the defensive end too deep because Braden McGregor left, same with Jalen Harrell, and Michigan returns nearly their entire defensive tackle too deep. They do lose Chris Jenkins, and the only reason why Chris Jenkins, sometimes people when talking about Michigan's defensive line almost forget about him, is because Graham and Grant were that good. They were at Chris Jenkins' level, and 20 total sacks come back for this defensive line as well. This unit has imposed their will on Ohio State, specifically the offensive line. And this year's unit can do the exact same thing. Ohio State has questions on the O-line, and Michigan, this will be their strongest point, not just on the defense, but perhaps on the entire roster. That's reason number 1, I think the biggest reason why Michigan could win the game for the 4th year in a row. Number 2 is their blocking not just from the line, but the tight ends, the wide receivers. Michigan is physical. That's a known fact. And even last year, where these teams were very close in physicality, it was the toughest, most physical Ohio State team all around that I saw under Day since 2019. In 2020 with COVID, it's hard to gauge unless you were Alabama that year, and just by virtue of you decapitating everyone, it's an accurate, educated guess to assume that Bama team was one of the greatest of all time. The offense, though, for Ohio State, with all the talent they have at receiver and tight end on the O-line, they really struggled at blocking last year. Really, really struggled. I mean, they could not get anything going on the ground unless Henderson matched up against undersized or slower defenses, like against Minnesota or Rutgers. I mean, Rutgers was probably the best defense that Henderson played against outside of Notre Dame, and against Notre Dame, he just had one big run. And it's not because Henderson's a bad back. It's because his O-line and his receivers struggled to block. And you really just had, from what I understood, Cade Stover and at times parts of the wide receiver offensive line who were good at blocking. For Michigan, it's everyone. They are unified. Run block, pass block, doesn't matter. And I think under Sherrone Moore, their physical nature will continue for this offense. Since 2021, they have averaged almost 600 rushing attempts per year, 579 to be exact. Nearly 3,000 rushing yards per year, 2,961 to be exact. Exactly 40 rushing touchdowns per season. And in pass block, they have only had a 4.5 quarterback sack percentage, which last year would have been top 25. I'm pretty sure for every season since 2021, that would have been top 25. The Buckeyes need to shed blocks and they need to tackle hard and hit hard versus this offense. If they do not bring their best game on defense, their absolute best, and they don't take care of even the short ground game, which killed Ohio State in the fourth quarter last year on that 7-8 minute TOP drive, it could kill them. And for Ohio State on offense, be more like Michigan in terms of blocking and being physical. Number 3 is Donovan Edwards. Remember that 75-yard and 85-yard touchdown run in the shoe in 2022 that really sealed the game? Outside of those runs, Donovan Edwards didn't do much because he's like Travion Henderson. And if his offensive line isn't gashing opposing defensive lines, opposing defenses, or they're facing a defense that is one of the best in the country or having one of their better days, Edwards is really a home run hitter back. Last year, I liked that at times he could churn through for a few extra yards, but he didn't really have that home run capacity until the Washington game, and that's when he's at his best. He's one of college football's best running backs when he has space, when he's in space. He's had almost 300 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns versus Ohio State in his career. Most of them came in 2022, when in those 2 plays, he abused Jim Knowles' man coverage. I mean, Ohio State just didn't have proper gap integrity. Michigan used wide receiver routes to guide the Ohio State defensive backs away. And boom, he's gone. Game over. Edwards has 1,662 yards and 15 TDs in his career, with great blocking in front of him, which I'm telling you that Michigan will be great at blocking. Will they be as elite as the previous 3 seasons? Unlikely, but you will still see that physical nature, and do not underestimate them. With the blocking he has, he will be lethal. He will. And it's up to Ohio State's defense to stop him and have gap integrity, and don't fall for Michigan. Don't be overreactive like they were in 2022 and at times in 2023. Number 4 is Will Johnson. Michigan's secondary has been one of the most effective at halting Ohio State's weapons over the past 3 seasons. Will Johnson is the nation's best cornerback. Denzel Burke is up there too, but for now I got to go with Will Johnson, and he's a future first-round pick. He has 7 career passes defended and 7 interceptions, And one of those came last year against Ohio State, where he jumped Marvin Harrison Jr.'s route and took it back for a few yards and set Michigan up nicely for their first touchdown, which had to come on a 4th and goal. It was an admirable stand by Ohio State's defense, even with the score, because of the position they were put in. His talent is unquestionable, and Michigan is one of the best secondaries to surround him with support. I know they lost Mikey Sainristil still, Josh Wallace, Keon Sabb transferred to Alabama, and Rod Moore is hurt. But they brought in Amir Hall, Wesley Walker, Jair Hill should be a great young player to contribute in the secondary. Same with Quentin Johnson and Makari Page, seniors and graduates who return. And Zeke Berry is another young player who should step up rather nicely. The passing offense for Ohio State. You even look at C.J. Stroud, who's the best passing quarterback in Ohio State history. He was limited against Michigan. And even when he improvised or had to do things off schedule, like convert a long 3rd down to, I believe, Chris Olave or Jackson Smith-Njigba or Garrett Wilson, one of those elite NFL wide receivers in 2021, he had to take his time. He had to see and view everything. He had to slow down. Ohio State's passing offense against Michigan has to slow down. They have to give their all only to not be able to produce at the level they want to produce at. And Will Johnson, whether it's Jeremiah Smith, whether it's Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Inniss, he will likely lock down or at least force one of those receivers to be content with not busting open Michigan's defense. And the secondary surrounding him will help Michigan to perform well against Ohio State's passing offense. So Will Johnson will force Ohio State's offense to be more patient. And finally, we have aggressive play calling. Sherrone Moore is the architect of Michigan's deadliest and most aggressive offense of the 21st century. And Day has slowly become more conservative against Michigan. Slowly. I mean, last year, 4th and short, decides to kick a field goal from long range. And I think part of that is because his roster, mostly from 2022 to 2023, got a little worse, especially at the things that Day likes to do. Pass the football and be able to get explosive plays in risky situations. The Rose Bowl and against Michigan in 2021 are perfect examples of that. Against Georgia in 2022 in the Peach Bowl. Michigan has remained confident. They've stayed aggressive. And since 2021, Ohio State's 3 of 5 on 4th downs, most of them playing catch-up. Michigan's 5 of 5. And they always seem to take the lead in being aggressive, while sometimes it feels like Ryan Day and Ohio State are playing catch-up or only being aggressive because, well, they have to be. And Michigan has averaged more yards per play and more points per play, despite, in 2 out of 3 seasons, not even coming close to Ohio State on the offensive side of the ball. Before we continue on to Ohio State and on to more of a deeper preview into the game, even talking about what I think the score might be, the yardage, how the game could progress, I encourage you to check out my Patreon page via the links in the description and down below in the pinned comment or in a reply to the pinned comment. If you want to be shouted out at the end of every video and also show up in the middle when I encourage listeners like you to check out and subscribe to my Patreon page, you can sign up as an all-conference member for $5 a month. All-American membership is $10 a month. You get bonus content along with the shout-outs. Heisman membership is $25 a month. You get direct access to me, though, along with all the other benefits, and signed College Football with Sam merchandise after 6 months of Heisman membership. That means if you're a Michigan fan, Ohio State fan, and you want direct access to me, you want to message me, talk to me about Michigan football or Ohio State football, and you want a signed College Football with Sam Ohio State or Michigan shirt, sign up as a Heisman member. Or you can sign up as an All-American or All-Conference member simply by signing up or just by watching this video. You're supporting the channel, and I appreciate that a lot. If you want to do extra, sign up for the Patreon page, and you'll get some extra too, depending on your tier. Also, you can check out my merchandise store if you don't want to sign up as a Heisman for 6 months of membership, and you just want the t-shirt, or you just want the hoodie, or even the College Football with Sam themed mug, if that's your thing. Check out my merchandise store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment or a reply to the pinned comment. The clothing is comfortable, and the mug, look, I've used it a few times, and I like it. It fits well. It's very crisp. But let's get back to the video. It's weird talking about merchandise and mugs in a football game. In a football game preview, rather. But let's get to Ohio State and the reasons why I think they could win, but also why I'm ultimately picking them to win. Number one is they have a deeper running back room. TreVeyon Henderson is one of college football's best running backs when he is open in space, and Judkins is a churning tackle buster. I mean, Judkins is the tank. That's what Judkins is. He is a not super heavy tank. That's probably the incorrect analogy, but he's a bunker buster. It's hard to bring him down, and I think he led the nation last year in broken tackles. Henderson's almost the exact opposite. If Henderson doesn't have open space, it's kind of like Donovan Edwards, but even less so. He can't do much. Barely even falls forward for a yard. But in open space, or even if he just has a little bit of space, he kills you, which is why he's one of the best. Because when you have that ability, as long as you have a competent offensive line, you will do work. You will. And combined, these two players have 5,470 yards on the ground. It's 63 rushing touchdowns. That's insane in their careers. And they each have had 2 seasons where they've had 100 receiving yards and at least 1 receiving touchdown. So they can make you pay through the air. Obviously, not as much as through the ground. That's why you're a running back. But they can catch the ball, and they can be receiving threats. So there's a lot of diversity and a lot of complementary football just within that room, and that's very helpful. Michigan has won the game over the previous 3 years because of their strong offensive lines and running back rooms. And while I lean toward Michigan rather strongly to have the better O-line this year, which a lot of people would disagree with, I also lean strongly toward Ohio State to have the better running back room this year. I think it's just obvious. Henderson and Judkins combined are better than any other running back room in the country. And even if you think Donovan Edwards is the best running back in America, which I don't, but I think he's very, very close to that, or he's going to be this year, you can't rank one running back who's close to being the best ahead of another running back in Henderson, who's close to being the best, plus another one who could be one of the best in Judkins. Having 2 of the best is better than 1 of the best, who might slightly outclass both individually. And that's if you think Edwards outclasses them, because there's a great shot that he'll be 3rd behind Judkins and Henderson. The statistics would tell you that's the case, at least. So having the better running attack is critical to winning the game. And what's also critical to winning any game is making your opponent one-dimensional on either side of the ball. Ohio State's best bet of doing that is forcing Michigan to do what they did against Penn State. And not necessarily because of Ohio State's pass rush. I don't think they have a necessarily Chop Robinson or at least Penn State level pass rusher or pass rush. What they do have is a secondary that you cannot pass on. And with a new quarterback and new receivers, only a tight end returning in Colston Loveland in the receiving game for the Wolverines, Ohio State can make Michigan's offense one-dimensional, and that will make it easier to stop the run. They have the best secondary by a mile in college football, and Tim Walton has done an excellent job. Perry Alagno, before he was fired, did a good job of developing. Burke is an NFL corner, so is Hancock. Caleb Downs, future NFL player. A Lathan Ransom, NFL player if he can stay healthy. And Davison Igbinosun is another great player in that cornerback room. Same with Jermaine Matthews Jr. I mean, there are so many players who, even in the 2 deep, would start at almost any other college football program. Listen to what the defensive backs return for Ohio State. This includes Caleb Downs coming in, and these are just, it actually isn't starters. This is everyone. 27 passes defended, 7 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles. Now, those aren't huge numbers, but keep in mind that Ohio State's secondary was extremely conservative last year, And the Big Ten didn't face many great offenses, especially passing offenses. The Big Ten, any school didn't face them. Ohio State really didn't. But you look at how they did against Notre Dame or Michigan or Missouri. Michigan was able to just get slow, steady gains on the secondary. McCarthy completed 80% of his passes, made some impressive throws, but it's not like he tore open this unit. And Sam Hartman and Brady Cook didn't do much, if anything. And those were good quarterbacks last year. Cook was a great quarterback. McCarthy was a elite quarterback last year. And they made Aller look like he was a D3 quarterback, oftentimes when they were blitzing or were in man coverage, and that's very impressive. What they bring back is incredible. And the statistics that they have returning, the production they have returning, even with but with a conservative defense especially, is scary. They got gouged through the air in 22, and I also say 21 they got gouged because McNamara making some of those big throws is something that he shouldn't be able to do with the receiver core he had against the level of talent that he was facing. But Ohio State stepped it up last year, and I don't see Alex Orji passing very much, if at all, on this unit and winning matchups. Number 3 is Ohio State's elite defensive front. I don't think it's as good as Michigan's. I don't. But if you factor in linebackers, there's a chance. But when I talk about the defensive front, I do include the linebackers a little bit, but I mainly talk about the defensive line. The defensive line is several players with All-American potential, like Sawyer, Tuimoloau, Hamilton, and Williams. And in terms of production, they return their entire defensive end, 2 deep, all defensive tackles minus Michael Hall Jr. It's a lot like Michigan's returning defensive tackle room, and 20.5 sacks. These units are returning similar amounts of production, and since Michigan's defensive line was better than Ohio State's last year, and better in both run defense and pass defense, pass rush, and I would say not by just a little bit, but by a decent amount in both, I'd say Michigan remains better on the D-line this year. But Ohio State will have one of the country's best defensive lines, and with all they lose on the O-line, 6 offensive linemen leaving the program, and Ohio State returning practically 4 starting defensive linemen. They were rotating on the defensive line between Hamilton, Williams, and Hall Jr. I have a hard time seeing Michigan's offensive line physically impale this defensive line. They didn't do it last year with an O-line that should be better than this year's Wolverine unit. The script, I think, likely flips. Ohio State's defensive line, while I don't see them dominating Michigan's offensive line, they may push around Michigan's offensive line and get tackles for loss, get pressure, force Orji to maneuver in the pocket, and make Edwards and Michigan's ground game and Kurt Campbell and Sherrone Moore take risks with the run game. Not just ground and pound up the middle, but try and get something explosive to happen, which isn't necessarily Michigan's identity. So that defensive front, forcing Michigan out of their identity, would be critical. Jeremiah Smith is reason number 4. Now, I know he's a true freshman, so this is perhaps a bold opinion, but I think he's going to be really good this year. And I think already he's one of the better wide receivers for Ohio State, which means he's one of the better wide receivers for college football. Again, bold opinion. Adding him is critical because with Marvin Harrison Jr. gone, and Julian Fleming gone, and Xavier Johnson, you really only have Emeka Egbuka coming back. He's the only wide receiver with proven experience. And let's say Egbuka was the only wide receiver who turned out to be anything close to elite this year. Well, then Ohio State's just not passing the ball on Michigan, period. And now Ohio State's offense is one-dimensional, with a questionable offensive line. That would not be good. Jeremiah Smith gives Ohio State, in my opinion, the ability to keep any defense honest in college football. Because again, you have one wide receiver who's close to elite, and only one. Well, then against a defense like Michigan's or Georgia's or Penn State's or Iowa's or maybe Alabama's, definitely Florida State's, maybe Oregon's, they can make you one-dimensional. And against an Ohio State defense that's bend but don't break, Ohio State's defense having to rely on a one-dimensional offense would likely result in them eventually breaking. That's typically how it goes. See last year in the Cotton Bowl versus Missouri. Jeremiah Smith, I think that Ohio State upgrading their ground game is huge, but they maintain their passing game by bringing in Jeremiah Smith, by him enrolling early, quickly removed his black stripe, and Michigan will have a hard time covering this receiver core. And I think they'll do an admirable job of doing it like they have the previous 3 years. You're bound to take a step back. And Michigan won't just be able to rely on their defense in the horseshoe against a team that will be one of the best, potentially the best in the country, and win that game. Keeping Michigan's defense or any elite defense honest is a key to win, especially when you feel like your roster is overall the better roster and you have home field advantage. And finally, at number 5, everything's on the line. And Day's an elite head coach, and elite head coaches with elite staffs and a roster that's one of the best in the country, they're going to win big when everything's on the line, or they're going to compete at the worst. The game means a lot to Ohio State. The reason why Ohio State's lost the game the previous 3 years is not because, they just don't care. It's because Michigan's been their best in eons, honestly. That's why. And Ohio State's fielded some elite teams in that stretch too, like in 2022 or last year. I mean, the Cotton Bowl loss is going to forever taint what was a team that was maybe Rod Moore dropping the interception away from them going 15-0 and winning the national title with Kyle freaking McCord, who I think is overhated, but most people would think that'd be a miracle because they think he's bad, which he isn't. But anyway, Ohio State's roster has enough questions to where I think they'll drop a game to either Oregon or Penn State. I think that'll light a fire under the team, especially when you consider the fact that a 10-2 Ohio State team, even if they beat Michigan, is not going to Indianapolis. They're probably not going to. Maybe they do. But Iowa, easy schedule. Penn State, easy schedule. Rutgers, easy schedule. Oregon, outside of Michigan and Ohio State, maybe Wisconsin on the road. Easy schedule relative to their talent. Michigan and Ohio State are the only teams that have tough overall schedules. And when you only look at the conference schedule, it's really only Ohio State that has this extremely hard schedule, playing in what, in my opinion, will be 3 top 8, top 7, top 6 teams in Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon. I think they'll drop one of the 2 before Michigan, or if they enter the game 11-0, it could be that they drop the game against Michigan for the 4th season in a row. But I think at Oregon is a game that is a nightmare matchup for Ohio State in many ways. Not that they'll get blown out, but Oregon just has a lot of advantages. They're going to be at home. It'll be a long flight there, and Dan Lanning is going to be aggressive, and they're physical. And aggressive teams that are physical have not done much kind to Ohio State in recent memory, plus some other things that I could spend another video talking on. But I think the pressure of winning the game, and not just winning the game and Ryan Day getting some competitive pressure off of his back, but also winning the Big Ten and guaranteeing a home playoff game or a first round bye, which will be incredibly valuable, will help push Ohio State over the edge and give them some of that fight that will be necessary to win this game. So overall, just heading back a little bit to the matchup, both of these defenses will be some of the best in the country. They could be the top 2 defenses in the country, though Iowa will certainly say something about that. But I think Ohio State wins. Michigan's defense is still built to stop Ohio State's offense. And the reasoning for that is now less so specific roster matchups at least. It's now just the overall fact that Ohio State has a questionable O-line and Michigan returns so many good players that it would take a Georgia-Oregon offense, an offense that really doesn't have any obvious questions, to be able to push around this defense. I don't think Ohio State's defense, with the O-line that they'll have And with Will Howard, too, who's turnover prone, Michigan's defense has been great at getting turnovers, great at getting pressure. I don't know how Will Howard will respond to that. So Michigan's defense does, I think, have a favorable matchup with Ohio State's offense. But Ohio State's defense also has a favorable matchup against Michigan's offense. And at the end of the day, with home field advantage, this being a defensive game, which is probably more within Michigan's comfort zone, but Ohio State's been getting more comfortable at winning close games, at not having to have everything go their way or engage in a shootout to win. I do favor Ohio State here in just not even looking at the power rankings or not giving Ohio State automatic benefit of the doubt because they have more blue chip players. Even when you factor that in, and that Michigan is breaking in a quarterback who's only had one career pass, Ohio State's defense is overall deeper. I think that Michigan, while they can win, they could. I see multiple pathways for them to win. At the end of the day, Ohio State has a superior roster, and they have the home field advantage. And those are two big things. Also, Sherrone Moore, while being a great game manager, and last year in the 4 games where he managed a game, I think he did a better job on average than Ryan Day did in all of his games last year. But now, Moore is not just the OC who's managing a Saturday. He's the CEO of the whole program. So how will he manage the game with everything on his shoulders? With everything? That's a big question mark. Ohio State is the more proven head coach, the more proven staff, the more proven roster. They're at home as well. So even though I think Michigan schematically and even at points roster-wise still has a matchup advantage, the matchup advantage is just one. And it doesn't take into account coaching or it doesn't take into account home field advantage. And an overall roster matchup ignores specific roster matchups. Ohio State will have a better passing matchup than Michigan. Ohio State's passing offense will be better. Their pass defense will be better. And for the ground game, this is as close as the ground games, the run defense and the rush offense combined will be, I think, in the 2020s. And it very well could tilt in Ohio State's favor. So for those reasons, I think the Buckeyes will win. And to drive the point home, to hit the nail on the head, the ground game has decided the game more than any other matchup. For over 20 matchups in a row, the team that has ran for the most yards and I think the highest yard per carry average has won. Ohio State will have their best ground game since 2019. Michigan could have their worst since 2020. I am not confident that the Buckeyes will outrush Michigan, but they have the much better passing offense, and that's a fact. And that plus home field advantage, and that Michigan's offense, even if their ground game, let's say it's elite, let's say it's the number 1 ground game in the country, and they're just tearing up defenses. Ohio State's defense will be an all-time great defense next year because it was last year, and they return a ton, and their offense isn't one-dimensional, and they're at home. So this year could be an exception to this previous rule that you have to have the better rushing attack to win, the better performing rushing attack. Rules are meant to be broken most of the time. And home field advantage, a far superior offense projected, and equal or better defense, I could only calculate that as a rivalry win. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, check out my Patreon page, my merchandise store via the links in the description and the pinned comment, and subscribe, like this video, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman members, to Chris Slayton, Conradul OH, and Ismar for being All-American members, and to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all-conference members. Have a great day, guys. Go Blue, and go Buckeyes. See ya.